You're pulled over on a dead, quiet stretch of highway in the middle of the night. The officer tapping his heavy flashlight against your glass doesn't want your license. He wants your dignity, your freedom, and the cash hidden in your trunk. He smiles, a predator playing with his food in the dark, completely unaware that the man gripping the steering wheel isn't a helpless victim. He's an undercover internal affairs detective with a wire strapped to his chest, and he's about to dismantle the corrupt officer's life, brick by agonizing brick. Detective Darius Vale adjusted his grip on the worn leather steering wheel of the old Chevy Impala, feeling the faint rhythmic vibration of the tires humming against the cracked asphalt. This particular stretch of road, winding through the dense pine-choked borders of the county, was a notorious dead zone. No streetlights, no gas stations, no cell service for miles. It was the perfect place for a predator to hunt. Darius glanced at the rearview mirror. Nothing but absolute swallowing darkness. He pressed 2 fingers against his collarbone, feeling the subtle hard ridge of the microtransmitter sewn into the lining of his faded denim jacket. "Radio check, Control. You still with me, Victor?" Darius murmured, keeping his lips barely moving, his eyes locked on the road ahead. A moment of static crackled in the tiny earpiece hidden deep in his right ear, followed by the gravelly voice of Captain Victor Lang. "Read you loud and clear, Darius. We're holding a parallel course on the interstate nearby. GPS tracker is solid. Vitals look good. Your heart rate is steady. Try to relax." "I am relaxed, Cap," Darius replied, though he could feel the familiar icy knot tightening in his stomach. It wasn't fear exactly. It was the heavy, suffocating anticipation of the performance he was about to give. "Just remember the profile," Lang warned, his voice taking on a sharper, purely professional edge. "We need him to initiate the contact. We need the constitutional violations clear as day. And we need the extortion on tape. Do not guide him. Let him dig his own grave." "Understood." Darius was a longtime veteran of the state police, the last several years spent in the murky, universally despised trenches of internal affairs. He had busted cops for skimming evidence, padding overtime, and tipping off cartels. But this operation was different. It was personal. For over a year, a frightening pattern had emerged from the county. Black and Hispanic drivers, usually traveling alone, were being pulled over for phantom traffic violations. What followed was always a masterclass in psychological terror and illegal search and seizure. The deputies would claim they smelled marijuana, tear the cars apart, and seize any cash they found under the guise of suspected narcotics proceeds, a gross abuse of civil asset forfeiture laws. If the drivers protested, they were threatened with felony drug trafficking charges, despite no drugs ever being found. Most victims were out of state, terrified, and lacked the resources to fight a corrupt county sheriff's department. They surrendered their money to keep their freedom. The primary target of the sting was Deputy Harlan Crowe. Crowe was a local legend for all the wrong reasons. A hulking second-generation cop with a jawline like an anvil and a reputation for brutal efficiency. His arrest statistics were phenomenal, his conviction rate abysmal, and his personal bank accounts inexplicably flush. 3 formal complaints had been filed against him in the past year. All 3 had mysteriously disappeared from the county records department. Darius was driving the perfect bait car. The Impala was registered to a fictitious identity. Marcus Hale, a freelance graphic designer from out of state with no criminal record, but a suspended license from years earlier. Just enough to make a cop look twice. In the trunk, secured in a battered gym bag, was $18,000 in marked sequential $50 bills. Darius tapped the brakes as he rounded a sharp blind curve. The speedometer dipped to exactly the speed limit. Approaching the usual hunting ground, he whispered into the wire. "This is his usual stretch." "Copy that. We are holding position. The cavalry is on standby." The road straightened out. Darius drove in silence for a long stretch. The only sounds were the drone of the engine and the wind whipping past the windows. Then it happened. It started as a faint glimmer in the rearview mirror, tucked into the thick brush of the median, a silhouette of a Dodge Charger, blacked out, engine idling. As Darius drove past, the Charger lurched forward, its headlights flicking on like the sudden opening of a beast's eyes. Darius's pulse spiked. "I've got a tail. Unmarked Charger." He just pulled out from the tree line. "Maintain your speed, Darius," Lang said, his voice taut. "Do not give him an inch of real, probable cause." Darius kept the needle perfectly aligned with the speed limit. His hands were at 10 and 2. He made sure he was perfectly centered in the lane. For a long, tense stretch, the Charger rode his bumper. So close, Darius could see the aggressive grill in his rearview mirror. The officer was running the plates. He was looking at the out-of-state registration. He was looking at the silhouette of the driver. Darius gripped the wheel. He knew the psychology of the corrupt stop. Crowe was trying to rattle him. He wanted Darius to tap the brakes or swerve slightly to give him the flimsiest excuse to hit the lights. Darius held steady. He was a stone. Suddenly, the interior of Darius's car was flooded with blinding, strobing bursts of red and blue. The piercing chirp of the police siren cut through the silent night. "Showtime, Cap," Darius said softly. "He's lighting me up. We are recording audio and video from the dash, the dome, and your wire. Stay in character, Marcus. Let him hang himself." Darius engaged his right turn signal, slowing the Impala down smoothly and guiding the car onto the loose gravel of the narrow shoulder. He threw the transmission into park, turned off the engine, and rolled down his window. He placed both hands firmly on the steering wheel, exactly as any nervous civilian should. In the side mirror, he watched the heavy door of the Charger swing open. Deputy Harlan Crowe stepped out into the humid night air. Crowe didn't approach immediately. He stood behind the open door of his cruiser for a long, calculated moment, letting the isolation of the dark highway and the blinding strobe lights do the initial heavy lifting of intimidation. It was a power play designed to make the driver sweat, to make them feel entirely at the mercy of the badge. Darius watched him in the side mirror. Crowe was a big man, pushing 240 pounds, wearing a tailored tactical uniform that looked more suited for a military raid than highway patrol. He adjusted his heavy duty belt, resting his right hand casually near the grip of his Glock, and finally began his slow, deliberate walk toward the Impala. As Crowe passed the trunk, Darius heard the unmistakable tap of the officer's heavy flashlight against the taillight, a textbook maneuver to leave fingerprints on the vehicle, but done with a sharp, aggressive force that rattled the plastic casing. Crowe stopped just behind the driver's side door, staying out of the direct line of sight. He clicked on a high-lumen tactical flashlight, immediately shoving the blinding beam directly into Darius's eyes. Darius squinted, turning his head slightly, raising a hand to shield his face. "Officer, is there a problem?" he asked, dialing his voice to a perfect blend of polite confusion and underlying anxiety. "Keep your hands on the wheel where I can see them, boy," Crowe commanded. His voice was a deep, gravelly drawl dripping with unearned authority and condescension. The word boy wasn't an accident. It was a calculated microaggression. A verbal chain slipped around Darius's neck in the first seconds of the interaction. Darius slowly lowered his hand and gripped the wheel tightly. "Yes, sir. Sorry. The light is just really bright. License, registration, and proof of insurance. Hand them out the window slowly." Darius reached methodically toward the sun visor, retrieving the fake documents prepared by the tech teams. He kept his movements smooth and telegraphed, pulling a worn wallet from his back pocket to extract the license. He handed the small stack of papers out the window into the darkness. Crowe snatched them. The beam of the flashlight dropped from Darius's face to the documents. "Marcus Hale," Crowe read aloud, chewing on the name as if tasting it for impurities. "You're a long way from home, Marcus. What brings you to this county at this hour of the night?" "I'm just passing through, officer," Darius said, his voice trembling slightly, a masterful piece of acting. "I'm driving down to Atlanta to see my sister. She's having surgery tomorrow. I wanted to beat the morning traffic." Crowe scoffed, a wet, dismissive sound. He leaned in closer to the window. Darius could smell the bitter tang of stale coffee and chewing tobacco on the man's breath. "Atlanta, right? You know how fast you were going back there, Marcus?" "I believe I was doing exactly the speed limit, sir. I had my cruise control set." "You believe wrong," Crowe said flatly. "I clocked you over the limit, swerving over the center line, too. You've been drinking tonight, Marcus. Lie number one, Darius thought. The dashcam data would prove he hadn't drifted an inch, and the GPS telemetry would confirm his speed down to the decimal. Keep digging, Harlan. No, sir. Not a drop. I've been driving for hours. I'm just tired, but I haven't been drinking. Crowe leaned further in, his head practically crossing the threshold of the window. He took a long, exaggerated sniff of the interior air. That's funny, Crowe said, his voice dropping to a menacing whisper, because I'm smelling a very distinct odor coming from this vehicle. Smells like unburned marijuana. There it was, the golden ticket. The fabricated probable cause that allowed corrupt cops to bypass the Fourth Amendment and tear a citizen's life apart. Sir, that's impossible, Darius protested, letting panic edge into his tone. I don't smoke. There are no drugs in this car. I promise you. Are you calling me a liar, Marcus? Crowe's hand dropped from the roof of the car to rest squarely on the butt of his sidearm. The implicit threat of lethal violence hung heavily in the humid night air. No, sir, not at all, Darius stammered, raising his hand slightly off the wheel. I'm just saying I don't know what you're smelling. Maybe it was a skunk on the road. Crowe didn't smile, but his eyes gleamed with the thrill of the hunt. He had his victim cornered. Step out of the vehicle. Officer, please. I'm just trying to get to the hospital. I said step out of the damn vehicle now, Crowe barked, yanking the driver's side door open with violent force. Keep your hands where I can see them. Darius unbuckled his seatbelt with trembling fingers and stepped out onto the gravel. The night air was stifling, heavy with the scent of pine and exhaust. Turn around. Face the car. Put your hands flat on the roof and spread your legs, Crowe ordered. Darius complied. He felt Crowe's heavy hands grab his hips, kicking his legs further apart with the toe of his combat boot. The pat-down was aggressively invasive. Crowe's hands roughly checked Darius's pockets, his waistband, running up his inseam with unnecessary force. He found Darius's wallet and cell phone and tossed them onto the roof of the car. He did not detect the wire taped flat beneath Darius's sternum.
You got any weapons on you? Any needles that are going to stick me?
Crowe demanded, breathing heavily into Darius's ear. No, sir, nothing. Go sit on the bumper of my cruiser. Do not move. If you move, I will consider you a threat. Do you understand? Yes, sir, Darius said, walking back toward the flashing lights of the police car. He sat on the cold steel of the push bumper, illuminated by the headlights, perfectly framed for the dashcam of Crowe's own vehicle. Through the earpiece, Lang's voice was a steady, calming anchor. We got it all, Darius. The fake speed, the phantom weed smell. The stop is entirely illegal. We are just waiting for the shakedown. Darius watched as Crowe began the search. The deputy didn't even bother calling in for a K-9 unit. He didn't need one. He was operating on the absolute certainty that the man sitting on his bumper was too terrified and powerless to ever challenge him in a courtroom. Crowe started with the driver's seat. He tore everything apart. He ripped the contents of the glove box onto the floorboards. He pulled the center console up with enough force to crack the plastic hinges. He pulled the back seat cushions forward, his flashlight beam darting erratically through the interior. For what felt like an eternity, Crowe dismantled the Impala. When he found nothing in the cabin, he walked around to the trunk. He popped it open. Darius tensed. The trap was about to spring. Crowe leaned into the trunk. Darius watched the deputy's broad back freeze. Slowly, Crowe pulled the battered gym bag out of the trunk and set it on the asphalt. He unzipped it. Even from a distance, Darius could see the exact moment the greed hijacked Crowe's nervous system. The officer's flashlight illuminated the thick, tightly bound stacks of $50 bills. $18,000. To a corrupt cop, it was a lottery ticket sitting on the side of the highway. Crowe stared at the money for a long time. He zipped the bag back up, picked it up, and walked slowly toward Darius. His demeanor had completely changed. The aggressive bark was gone. In its place was a chilling, quiet menace. Crowe stopped a few feet from where Darius sat on the cruiser's bumper. He dropped the gym bag onto the gravel with a heavy thud. The strobe lights painted the deputy's face in alternating flashes of demonic red and cold blue. He crossed his arms, staring down at Darius with a look of absolute predatory triumph. "Well, well, well, Marcus," Crowe said, his voice smooth, almost conversational. "Look what we have here. You want to explain to me why you're driving around in the middle of the night with a bag full of cash in your trunk?" Darius looked up, feigning utter terror. He let his shoulders slump. "Officer, please. That's my life savings. I'm a freelance designer. I do cash jobs. I was bringing it to Atlanta to help pay for my sister's medical bills. The hospital needs a deposit." Crowe let out a low, humorless chuckle. He shook his head slowly, acting out a pantomime of pity. "Medical bills. That's a good one. That's real creative, Mike. But you and I both know that's a lie. It's the truth. I swear to God."
"Don't bring God into this, boy,"
Crowe snapped, his eyes hardening. "I've been doing this job a long time. People who do honest work put their money in a bank. People who traffic narcotics. People who move weight up and down the corridor. They carry duffel bags full of banded 50s. I don't sell drugs. You searched my car. You didn't find any drugs." "I didn't find any drugs yet," Crowe corrected, stepping closer, looming over Darius. "But I found the proceeds, and under state law, I have the authority to seize any asset suspected of being involved in the drug trade. That money is now property of the county sheriff's department." Darius's heart hammered against the wire taped to his chest. "Say the words, Harlan. Give me the extortion." "You can't do that," Darius cried out, standing up from the bumper. "That's $18,000. That's everything I have. You're robbing me." Faster than Darius could blink, Crowe's hand shot out, grabbing a handful of Darius's jacket and violently shoving him backward. Darius's spine slammed hard against the grill of the police cruiser. Crowe pressed his forearm against Darius's collarbone, pinning him, leaning in so close their noses almost touched.
"Listen to me very carefully, you piece of shit,"
Crowe hissed, dropping all pretense of being a law enforcement officer. He was a thug with a badge, purely and simply. "I am not robbing you. I am enforcing the law. Now, the way I see it, you have two choices." Crowe lessened the pressure just slightly, letting Darius breathe, but kept him pinned. "Choice number one," Crowe said softly. "I arrest you right now. I call a tow truck to impound your little Chevy. I charge you with felony possession with intent to distribute, and I lock you in a cell in the county jail. A guy like you, out of state, no connections. You'll sit in central lockup for months before you even see a judge. Your car will be auctioned off, and you will never see a dime of this money again. Ever." Darius swallowed hard, looking at Crowe with wide, panicked eyes. "What's choice number two?" Crowe smiled. It was an ugly, crooked thing. "Choice number two is you recognize that you got caught slipping, but I'm feeling generous tonight. You sign a waiver abandoning this property. I put the bag in my trunk. You get back in your car. You drive your ass to Atlanta. And you thank whatever stars you pray to that you get to sleep in a bed tonight instead of a cage." In the command van nearby, Captain Lang slammed his hand on the desk. "Got him. We have the explicit threat and the extortion demand on tape. Clear as a bell."
"Darius,"
Lang's voice crackled in the earpiece.
"You have the green light. Burn him down."
Darius didn't move immediately. He looked at the heavy hand pinning him to the car. He looked at the badge pinned to Crowe's chest, a symbol of trust that this man had weaponized to destroy innocent lives. Darius thought about the dozens of victims in the case files, single mothers, college kids, working men who had been terrified into giving up their hard-earned money just to survive an encounter with the law. The fear melted away from Darius's face. The nervous tremble in his hands completely vanished. He straightened his spine, easily pushing Crowe's arm off his chest with a sudden fluid display of strength that caught the deputy entirely off guard. Crowe stumbled back a half step, his hand immediately dropping to his gun. "Hey, I told you not to." "Deputy Harlan Crowe," Darius said. His voice was no longer the trembling pitch of Marcus Hale. It was deep, resonant, and coated in absolute freezing authority. Crowe froze, The sudden shift in Darius's demeanor was so jarring, so completely outside the script of power he was used to, that his brain struggled to process it. "What the hell did you just say?" Darius reached into his left breast pocket. Crowe drew his weapon halfway from the holster, screaming, "Show me your hands! Show me your hands right now!" "Relax, Harlan," Darius said coldly. He pulled out a sleek black leather wallet and flipped it open, illuminated perfectly by the cruiser's headlights. The gold shield of the State Police Internal Affairs Bureau gleamed in the light right next to Darius's real identification. "Detective Darius Vale, State Police Internal Affairs," Darius announced, his voice slicing through the humid night air like a scalpel.
You're done.
Crowe stared at the badge. All the color drained from his face, leaving him a sickening shade of gray. His jaw went slack. The heavy Glock remained half drawn in his holster, his hand trembling uncontrollably. "What? What is this?" Crowe stammered, his eyes darting frantically between the badge and Darius's face. The arrogant predator from seconds ago was gone, replaced by a terrified animal who had just realized the trap had snapped shut. "This is the end of the line," Darius said, stepping forward, forcing Crowe to take another step back. "Every word you've said for the last stretch of time has been recorded. The illegal stop, the fabricated probable cause, the assault, the extortion. We have it all on a wire. And we have it on your own dash cam." Crowe's chest heaved. Panic was setting in, thick and suffocating. "Now listen here, detective. This is a misunderstanding. I was testing you. We got a lot of drug traffic." "Save it for the federal prosecutor, Harlan," Darius interrupted. He reached up and tapped the hidden earpiece. "Captain, target is secure. Bring the cavalry." Less than seconds later, the dark horizon of the highway lit up. From both directions, a swarm of headlights appeared. The wail of multiple sirens shattered the silence as 4 unmarked SUVs and 3 marked state trooper cruisers descended on the scene, surrounding Crowe's vehicle and boxing him in completely. Crowe looked around at the flashing lights closing in on him. His empire of dirt was crumbling before his eyes. He looked back at Darius, his eyes wide and pleading. "Please," Crowe whispered, a pathetic crack in his voice. "I have a family. I have a pension." Darius looked at the man, feeling absolutely zero pity. "So did the people you robbed," Darius said softly. "Turn around and put your hands behind your back." The heavy thud of combat boots hitting the asphalt echoed like a drumline as heavily armed state troopers swarmed the isolated stretch of highway. They moved with absolute surgical precision. The flashing red and blue strobes painted the towering pine trees in chaotic bursts of light, transforming the dark highway into a massive, undeniable crime scene. Deputy Harlan Crowe stood frozen, his hands hovering awkwardly near his waist. The predatory swagger that had defined him just moments ago was entirely gone. He was a deflated balloon, his chest heaving under the weight of his tactical vest as reality crashed down on him. "Hands behind your back, Harlan! Interlock your fingers!" shouted a state trooper, stepping into Crowe's personal space with a drawn weapon. Crowe offered zero resistance. He turned around slowly, interlacing his thick fingers behind his head. The harsh metallic ratchet of the steel handcuffs snapping tightly around his wrists sounded like the slamming of a prison door. Darius stood near the Impala, watching the scene unfold as he peeled the false mustache and thick glasses off his face, tossing them onto the driver's seat. He took a deep breath, the adrenaline slowly receding from his bloodstream, leaving behind a cold, sharp focus. A black Chevy Tahoe rolled up onto the shoulder, parking at a sharp angle. Captain Victor Lang stepped out. Lang was a man carved from granite, decades on the force, with silver hair cropped close to his scalp, and a face lined with the stress of policing the police. He walked past the detained deputy without giving him a single glance and approached Darius. "Clean operation," Lang said, extending a hand. Darius shook it, rubbing his chest where the hidden wire was still taped tightly to his skin. "He followed the profile perfectly, Cap. He didn't even hesitate. Soon as he saw the cash, the badge went right out the window." Lang nodded grimly, looking over his shoulder at the gym bag of marked bills sitting on the gravel. "Secure the bait money, Have the tech team pull the dash cam from his cruiser immediately. I don't want a single gigabyte of data getting accidentally corrupted by the county's dispatch servers." As a pair of troopers began patting Crowe down for secondary weapons, the disgraced deputy suddenly found his voice. "Captain Lang! Captain! Listen to me!" Crowe shouted, his voice cracking with desperation. "This is a setup. You're stepping on toes you don't want to step on. This county is out of your jurisdiction for internal audits." Lang slowly turned around and walked over to where Crowe was being held against the side of a cruiser. The captain leaned in close, his voice barely above a whisper, but laced with absolute venom. "You don't have jurisdiction anymore, Crowe," Lang said coldly. "You aren't a police officer. You're a federal suspect. And as for stepping on toes, we brought the FBI Civil Rights Division in on this weeks ago. In fact, we've already handed over the files of the last dozen out-of-state drivers you extorted to the Equal Justice Initiative. The civil suits alone are going to bankrupt your entire department." Crowe's eyes widened at the mention of the legendary civil rights attorneys. He knew exactly what that meant. This wasn't just an internal reprimand or a quiet resignation. This was a national scandal. This was federal prison. I want my union rep," Crowe stammered, looking down at the gravel. "You'll get a phone call when we process you," Lang replied flatly. "Put him in the transport van. We are taking him to the state barracks in the capital. Nobody from the county gets to talk to him." Darius watched as Crowe was shoved into the back of a heavily armored transport van, the heavy steel doors slamming shut with a satisfying finality. "You think he's acting alone?" Darius asked, turning back to Lang. "Not a chance in hell," Lang said, pulling a cigar from his breast pocket but not lighting it. "A racket this lucrative, running for this long. There's no way a beat deputy pulls this off without a green light from the top. The rot in this county goes all the way up the ladder." "So we squeeze him," Darius stated. "We squeeze him until he bursts," Lang confirmed. "Let's get back to the city. The real work starts in the interrogation room." In the early morning hours, at state police headquarters, the interrogation room was a sterile, unforgiving box. Gray walls, a stainless steel table bolted to the concrete floor, and a single harsh fluorescent light buzzing overhead. Harlan Crowe sat in a stiff metal chair, his wrists now cuffed to an eye bolt on the table. They had stripped him of his tactical belt, his badge, his gun, and his radio. Without the armor of his uniform, he looked remarkably small. The sweat had soaked through his gray undershirt, and his leg bounced with a frantic, nervous energy. The heavy metal door clicked open. Darius and Captain Lang walked in. They didn't slam files on the table. They didn't yell. They sat down opposite Crowe in total, suffocating silence. Darius placed a small digital recorder on the table and pressed a button. "Choice number 2 is you recognize that you got caught slipping, but I'm feeling generous tonight. You sign a waiver abandoning this property. I put the bag in my trunk." Crowe flinched as his own voice filled the small room, the sheer arrogance of his extortion echoing off the concrete walls. Darius hit the stop button. "Federal Hobbs Act extortion," Darius said quietly, ticking the charges off on his fingers. "Deprivation of rights under color of law, armed robbery, official misconduct, wire fraud. Since you used your police radio to run my fake plates, you're looking at a minimum of 25 years in a federal penitentiary, Harlan. A cop in general population. You know how that ends." Crowe swallowed hard. "I told you I want my union lawyer." "Your union lawyer was informed of your arrest minutes ago," Lang said, leaning forward and resting his forearms on the cold steel. "He asked what the charges were. When I told him we had you on a wire, extorting an undercover IA detective and seizing marked FBI cash, he said, and I quote, 'I'm not waking up at this hour to defend a suicide mission.' He'll be here later. By then, the federal prosecutor will have already filed the indictment." Crowe's face fell. He was completely isolated. "Here is the reality of your situation, Harlan," Darius continued, lowering his voice to a tone of almost surgical detachment. "You are the little fish. You're the guy standing on the highway taking the risks. But we know $18,000 is a lot of cash to hide on a deputy's salary. We pulled your financials. You live in a modest house. You drive an older truck. You don't have offshore accounts. So where's the money going? Crowe stared at the table, his jaw clenched so tight a muscle ticked violently in his cheek. We know you're kicking it up, Lang said, playing the final card. You're a bagman. You collect the cash from the highway stops and you pass it up the food chain. We want the head of the snake. We want Sheriff Vernon Slade. At the mention of the sheriff's name, Crowe physically recoiled. You guys are crazy. Slade will bury me. He'll bury you. He owns the judges in this county. He owns the county commissioners. You don't know what you're kicking over. I don't care who he owns in a Hicktown County court. Lang fired back, slamming his palm on the table, the sudden noise making Crowe jump. This is a federal RICO case now. The FBI is drafting the warrants as we speak. If you go down protecting Vernon Slade, you are going to die in a cage. If you give him to us right now, I will personally call the U.S. Attorney and secure you a plea deal. 5 years in a minimum security federal camp. You keep your life. But you have to give me the sheriff, and you have to give him to me tonight. Crowe looked back and forth between Darius and Lang. The silence stretched for an agonizing minute. He was doing the brutal calculus of a cornered criminal. Loyalty versus survival. Finally, Crowe let out a ragged, defeated breath. He slumped forward, staring at his handcuffed wrists. It's not just the highway stops, Crowe whispered, his voice barely audible. Darius leaned in. Keep talking. The highway seizures are just petty cash, Crowe confessed, the dam finally breaking. Slade has a system. He targets immigrant-owned businesses, independent truckers, out-of-state minorities, people who are too scared of the system to fight back. We seize their cash, claim it's drug money, and funnel it into a discretionary county fund that Slade completely controls. Where is the cash kept before it's laundered? Darius asked, his pen flying across a notepad. There's a drop, Crowe said, looking up. Every week, between certain hours, the deputies working the night shift are supposed to take the seized cash to a lockbox. Where? Lang demanded. Not at the precinct, Crowe said, a bitter smile touching his lips. Slade is too smart for that. He keeps a private hunting cabin out near the lake. There's a floor safe under the floorboards in the master bedroom. I was supposed to drop your $18,000 there tonight. If I don't show up by the appointed time, Slade's second-in-command is going to check the safe. When he realizes I'm missing, they'll scrub the cabin clean and burn the ledgers. Darius exchanged a sharp, electrified look with Captain Lang. The twist had just elevated the stakes from a single corrupt cop to a ticking time bomb. You're sure about the ledgers? Darius asked. Slade keeps meticulous records. Crowe nodded slowly. He wants to know exactly which deputies are earning their keep. Everything is in that safe. Cash, jewelry, ledgers, all the proof you need. All. Lang stood up from the table, his chair scraping loudly against the concrete. He pulled his cell phone from his pocket. We have very little time before Sheriff Slade's cartel realizes their bagman has been compromised, Lang said, his eyes hard and focused. Darius, gear up. We aren't waiting. We're raiding the sheriff's cabin right now. The clock was merciless. They had little time before Sheriff Vernon Slade's second-in-command realized their bagman was missing and torched the evidence. The convoy consisted of 3 blacked-out Bearcat tactical vehicles and 2 unmarked FBI Suburbans tearing down the winding pitch-black county roads at high speed. They drove without sirens and without flashing lights, guided only by night vision optics and the urgent icy grip of adrenaline. Inside the lead vehicle, the tension was suffocating. Detective Darius Vale sat shoulder to shoulder with Captain Lang and the newly arrived lead of the FBI's Public Corruption Unit, Special Agent Marcus Hale. Hale was a pragmatic, heavy-set man who had dismantled corrupt police precincts from Chicago to New Orleans. He was currently reviewing the drone telemetry on a glowing tough book. We have a complication, gentlemen, Hale announced, his voice vibrating over the hum of the heavy diesel engine. He tapped the screen, pointing to a thermal imaging feed beamed down from an FBI drone, hovering silently above the target area. Crowe said the drop was supposed to be monitored by Slade's chief deputy, Hale continued, zooming in on the glowing white silhouette of the hunting cabin. but the thermal is painting 4 distinct heat signatures inside the main room. And look at the driveway. Darius leaned over. The infrared camera clearly showed 3 vehicles parked under the thick canopy of oak trees. 2 were standard county-issue Ford Explorers. The third was a massive civilian model Lincoln Navigator. "That Navigator is registered to Vernon Slade," Lang said, his jaw tightening. "The sheriff is there personally. This isn't just a drop. They're having a board meeting." "It changes the threat matrix," Hale warned, racking the charging handle of his M4 carbine. "Slade is a paranoid man. If he's awake and meeting this late, they might be armed with more than just their service weapons. We breach fast, we breach hard, and we do not give them a single second to process what's happening." "Seconds to target," the tactical driver announced over the intercom. Darius checked the action on his Glock. His undercover persona was dead and buried. He was no longer the terrified civilian on the highway. He was the tip of the spear that was about to pierce the heart of the county's darkest secret. The convoy cut its engines entirely as they crested the final hill, coasting on sheer momentum down the dirt access road. The vehicle slid to a halt on the damp pine needles yards from the cabin. The air outside was freezing, heavy with the scent of lake water and decaying wood. Without a word, heavily armed state troopers and FBI SWAT operators poured out of the vehicles. They moved like shadows, a synchronized lethal tide flowing toward the wooden porch of the cabin. Darius stacked up on the left side of the heavy oak front door, right behind the breaching operator carrying the steel ram. Through the thin glass of the front window, Darius could hear the low murmur of voices and the clinking of glass. They were drinking, celebrating. Hale held up 3 fingers, then 2, then 1.
Smash!
The steel ram struck the door lock with the force of a freight train. The heavy wooden frame splintered instantly, the door flying inward and slamming against the interior wall with a deafening crack. "Police, search warrant! Let me see your hands! Do it now!" The tactical team flooded the room in a blur of Kevlar, laser sights, and screaming voices. Darius pushed through the threshold, sweeping his weapon across the room. The scene inside the cabin was a grotesque tableau of pure, unchecked arrogance. The air was thick with the smell of expensive cigar smoke and spilled bourbon. Sitting around a large, rustic poker table were 4 men. Sheriff Vernon Slade sat at the head, a glass of amber liquid frozen halfway to his mouth. To his right was his chief deputy, Everett Boone. But it was the other 2 men that made Darius's blood run cold. One was County Commissioner Harlan Voss. The other was the Honorable Judge Everett Harlan, the presiding magistrate of the county criminal court. Spread out across the green felt of the poker table, stacked like casino chips, were dozens of banded bundles of cash. Passports, gold wedding bands, and confiscated Rolex watches were piled carelessly next to a half-empty bottle of expensive bourbon. They were literally dividing the spoils of their victims.
"Nobody move! Hands on the table!"
Hale roared, his rifle trained squarely on Sheriff Slade's chest. Panic erupted. Commissioner Voss let out a pathetic shriek, throwing his hands over his head and knocking his chair backward. Chief Deputy Boone's hand twitched instinctively toward the holster on his belt. "Don't do it, Boone!" Darius shouted, closing the distance and pressing the muzzle of his pistol inches from the deputy's face. "I will drop you right here. Hands on the table." Boone froze, his eyes wide with sudden terror, and slowly raised his hands, placing his palms flat against the felt right on top of a stack of stolen 50s. Sheriff Vernon Slade, however, didn't panic. He slowly lowered his bourbon glass to the table. His face was flushed with anger, his eyes narrowing into venomous slits. He looked at Lang, then at the FBI windbreakers surrounding him.
"You have made a catastrophic mistake, Lang,"
Slade said, his voice a low, dangerous rumble. He didn't raise his hands. "I am the chief law enforcement officer of this county. You are trespassing on private property without jurisdiction." "Read the patch, Bill," Hale interrupted, stepping forward and tossing a folded federal warrant directly into the puddle of spilled bourbon on the table. "This is a federal RICO raid. Your jurisdiction ended the moment you started using state highways to run an organized crime syndicate. Stand up and turn around." "I demand to make a phone call," Judge Harlan stammered, his face pale and sweating profusely. "I am a sitting judge. This is an outrage. I was just here for a friendly game of cards. You're going to need a hell of a lawyer for that defense, Your Honor, Lang sneered, gesturing to the troopers. Cuff them all. Strip their weapons. As the troopers violently zip-tied the wrists of the most powerful men in the county, Darius walked past the poker table and headed straight down the short hallway toward the master bedroom. He knew the money on the table was just the tip of the iceberg. The real prize was beneath the floorboards. Darius kicked open the door to the master bedroom. The room was sparsely furnished. A heavy timber bed, a dresser, and a large bearskin rug covering the center of the hardwood floor. Hale and Lang followed close behind. Granger said under the floorboards, Darius said, grabbing the edge of the heavy rug and yanking it aside. There, perfectly flush with the oak planks, was a heavy steel trap door. Darius pulled the recessed handle, revealing a state-of-the-art fireproof floor safe embedded directly into the foundation of the cabin. It had a digital biometric keypad and a traditional combination dial. Slade isn't going to give up the combination, Lang muttered, staring down at the steel box. And a drilling team will take hours to crack it. Bring Boone in here, Hale ordered over his radio. 2 troopers dragged the terrified chief deputy into the bedroom. Boone was shaking violently, his bravado completely shattered by the reality of the federal raid. Hale stepped up to the man, leaning in close. Listen to me very carefully, Everett. You are currently facing charges for armed robbery, extortion, and racketeering. But right now, at this exact second, I need this safe opened. If you open it, I will write in my report that you cooperated with a federal investigation. If you don't, I will personally ensure you get charged with obstruction of justice, and I will make sure the prosecutor asks for a consecutive sentence. You will die in prison. What's the code? Boone looked back toward the hallway where Sheriff Slade was screaming profanities at the troopers. Then he looked at the cold, unforgiving face of the FBI agent. The thin blue line was finally breaking. 6492, Boone whispered, his voice cracking. Then turn the dial clockwise to 45. Darius knelt down. He punched the numbers into the keypad. A green light flashed. He gripped the heavy steel dial, turning it smoothly. He heard the heavy, satisfying clank of the internal deadbolts retracting. He pulled the heavy steel door open. A collective silence fell over the 3 law enforcement officers in the room. Even Hale, a hardened veteran of public corruption, let out a slow, sharp breath. The safe wasn't just full, it was overflowing. Stacked neatly in the center were bricks of cash, easily totaling over $250,000. But it was the items surrounding the cash that painted the true, horrifying picture of the cartel's cruelty. There were dozens of Ziploc bags filled with personal belongings. Darius reached in and pulled one out. It contained a silver crucifix necklace, a worn leather wallet, and a folded photograph of a young Hispanic family. Written on the outside of the bag in black Sharpie was a name and the note, "Refuse to sign waiver." "Look at this," Lang said softly, pulling out a stack of manila envelopes. They contained vehicle titles. Slade wasn't just stealing their cash. When the drivers couldn't pay the impound fees, he was seizing their cars and signing the titles over. He was stealing their livelihoods. But the most damning piece of evidence sat at the very bottom of the safe. Darius reached past the cash and pulled out a thick black moleskin notebook. He flipped it open. It was the ledger. Sheriff Slade's meticulous nature was his ultimate undoing. The notebook contained dates, license plate numbers, the names of the deputies who made the stops, and the exact dollar amounts seized. But it went deeper. The right-hand column of the pages detailed the payouts. It showed kickbacks to Judge Harlan for rubber stamping the fraudulent asset forfeiture requests. It showed campaign contributions to Commissioner Voss to keep the county auditors away from the sheriff's discretionary fund. It was a master blueprint of systemic, weaponized racism and class warfare funded entirely by terrorizing innocent citizens on the dark stretches of the highway. "We got him," Darius whispered, staring at the pages. "We have every single one of them." "Bag it all," Hale ordered, his voice echoing with absolute authority. "Every scrap of paper, every dollar. Chain of custody starts now." In the early morning hours, the sun finally broke over the horizon, casting long golden shadows across the dew-soaked lawn of the county courthouse. But the morning brought no peace to the corrupt officials of the county. Acting on the intelligence gathered from the IA wire and the FBI raid, the U.S. Attorney had already authorized massive sweeping arrest warrants across the county. By dawn, a dozen deputies involved in the highway shakedown ring had been dragged from their beds and placed in federal custody. Darius stood on the steps of the courthouse, a cup of bitter black coffee in his hands, watching the media circus unfold. The Internal Affairs Division had quietly tipped off the local news affiliates, and the resulting swarm of satellite trucks and reporters was chaotic. The heavy glass doors of the courthouse swung open. Sheriff Vernon Slade, stripped of his tailored uniform and dressed in a bright orange federal jumpsuit, was led down the steps in handcuffs and leg irons. He kept his head down, desperately trying to hide his face from the blinding flashes of the press cameras. Right behind him, looking thoroughly destroyed, was Judge Harlan. Darius took a sip of his coffee. The icy knot in his stomach, the one that had been there since he pulled onto the dark highway hours earlier, had finally dissolved. Captain Lang walked out of the courthouse and stood next to Darius. "Buchanan just called," Lang said, watching the sheriff being shoved into the back of a transport van. "They're using the ledger to track down the victims. The Equal Justice Initiative is filing an emergency class action injunction. Every dime in that safe and every car sitting in the impound lot is going back to the people it was stolen from." "And Crowe?" Darius asked. "Squealing like a pig to the feds right now, trying to shave a few years off his sentence. It won't work. Buchanan is making an example out of all of them." Darius nodded slowly. He looked out at the highway in the distance, the asphalt shimmering slightly in the early morning light. For years, that road had been a hunting ground, a place where the badge was used as a weapon of terror against those who had the least power to fight back. But not tonight. Tonight, the predators had pulled over the wrong car. Darius tossed his empty coffee cup into a nearby trash can.
"Come on, Cap,"
he said, turning back toward their unmarked vehicle. "I'm exhausted. Let's go home." The flashing lights of the police cruisers faded into the bright morning sun, leaving behind a county that was finally truly awake. The chilling reality is that civil asset forfeiture laws are still abused across the country today, turning innocent drivers into victims of highway robbery by the very people sworn to protect them. But as this story shows, no corrupt empire lasts forever when brave men and women decide to hold the powerful accountable. If this intense, real-life-inspired takedown kept you on the edge of your seat, smash that like button and share this video to help expose the truth. Don't forget to subscribe and hit the bell icon for more incredible, heart-pounding stories of justice served.